use @Lisk Center, so that's the location, and we use typically this hashtag ETHDEVNL. So we depend on really nice people like Lisk Center to host us. We depend on nice people to pay for our drinks. And tonight it is Alessio that is paying for our drinks from DEVNL. If you hadn't had any money yet from him, then go to him first, install DEX Wallet via one of the links I sent or in the comments of this meetup, and then present your QR code. He'll drop some ETHDAI, and you'll learn everything about what ETHDAI is tonight, because we have several really interesting speakers, because ETHDAI is like the love child of MakerDAO and DAI, and we have lead devs of those two projects here tonight. Actually, Alessio has financed his project with a grant from MakerDAO. So ultimately, it's actually Wouter who is paying the right?
And the maker of it.
And Wouter will explain you what MakerDAO is about. So, are you paying too?
And also, he's a winner of URI hackathon. Right?
Yes.
Yes. So everybody's paying besides me.
Okay. So so 3 DAI, that's like 2 soft drinks or 1 beer, but you mustn't forget to tip people. You can also tip people if you have a nice conversation together. You show your QR code to each other, you drop some ETHDAI. Okay, but let's listen to who is going to explain us what the DAI stablecoin system is all about. So,
yes, so welcome everyone. I'm Wouter Kampmann, I'm the head of engineering at MakerDAO. I'm going to present you tonight actually 3 things. So I'll first present basically an introduction to what mostly the DAI stablecoin is, and of course a little bit about MakerDAO as well. Second, we'll have a look at the differences between our current version that is running in production, the single collateral DAI version, and the upcoming multi-collateral DAI version. Now, I was told that tonight was a really technical audience, so if we do have time left, then I also have some deep dives into the multi-collateral DAI system at the end. So I hope that we'll get there. Okay. So first, I'll try to keep this short. I guess most people by now are familiar with DAI. Is there anyone in the room that still needs to be introduced to the very basics? I guess not, because that's the goal of the evening. So DAI is a soft-backed stablecoin to the USD. As you know, it's an asset-backed hard currency, and it's programmable money without a central point failure. This is just very quickly to locate DAI and how it really relates to other types of stablecoins. So you've probably heard about other stablecoins such as TrueUSD and so on. The DAI stable token is a little bit different. The typical model is an IOU model, which means that you'll have a company that basically issues a new USD token. For every token that they issue, they actually keep a US dollar in custody on a traditional bank account. There are also other stablecoins that use purely algorithmic ways of stabilizing their token. For example, what it means is that when the supply is too high, for example, the stablecoin drops in value, then they will start to detect that and try and issue new tokens. DAI is a little bit different in that we're completely decentralized and asset collateral backed. So that's just to kind of set the scene here. So what does that mean? It's really an over-collateralized stablecoin. So you do have a smart contract that holds what we call a collateralized debt position. And what this is, you can see this depicted here. So you need to lock in collateral in that contract, and at the moment, the single collateral DAI version only allows Ethereum as collateral. And then you can basically take out the loan. So you generate the IOUs, generate the stable coin, completely decentralized. There's no counterparty, there's no bank, it's just a decentralized network. And you can start using DAI. So you need to keep your collateral is in circulation. And the reason is that the system will guarantee that the value of or total value of the collateral that is locked up in the system is always at least $1 per DAI token in circulation. And the way that happens is, I'll explain that in a moment. So as I noted, the current version, single collateral DAI, only allows you to lock up Ethereum. However, we're working very hard at the moment to launch our next version, which is multi-collateral DAI. And the reason for that is that although we think that our mechanic of the stablecoin works quite well, and we have actually seen this demonstrated during the Ethereum bear market in 2018. So the price of Ethereum went from $1,400 to about $70, and the DAI token actually maintained its peg of $1. So that was pretty good already, but still we see that there are limits to this system. And what multi-collateral DAI will do is take away the central or the most core dependency of the single collateral DAI system, which is its dependency on ETH and ETH alone as collateral. So what is the difference then? Yeah, first the timeline. So we actually released the first version, which was kind of an alpha version in December 2016. Current version that is running in production is single collateral DAI, which is single DAI, and then the new version will be launched in 2019. So what is the difference between single collateral DAI and multi-collateral DAI? First of all, obviously you have multiple collateral types that will be supported by multi-collateral DAI, whereas single collateral DAI only has one. It's, as I mentioned, it's more diversified and stable. And yeah, so another change that we've made is that the way that the system keeps the price back to $1. So your collateral is locked up in the system, you've taken out DAI tokens. If the system sees that the value of your collateral actually drops below or tends to drop below a certain minimum level of collateralization, you would say, well, that would be $1 per DAI token in circulation, but actually it's a bit higher to have a margin. So when your collateral value drops below that minimum collateralization level, then your position will be liquidated, which means that your collateral will be sold off. Now, this is quite a technical difference, but the way that liquidations happen is different in single collateral DAI than in multi-collateral DAI. Multi-collateral DAI uses auctions, which is an improved system, and yeah, we'll come back to that in a moment. Another aspect of the system is the stability fee. So, as I mentioned, you can actually compare the system with a decentralized bank. So you are taking out a loan against the system, not against the counterparty, but with a loan typically also comes an interest that you pay. And the way that you need to interpret this in the case of MC, or in the case of Maker, is a stability fee. You pay a particular fee that funds the system that keeps your stablecoin stable. And here too, there is a difference between single and multi-collateral DAI. So in single collateral DAI, you need to pay your stability fee with the MPR token, which is a second token that is part of the MakerDAO ecosystem. Multi-collateral DAI, you pay that in DAI, which is much easier to do. Then another thing is when the liquidation system actually fails, and I talked already about the little safety margin that we maintain to make sure that when your CDP is liquidated, that we actually get more than $1 for your collateral per DAI that is in circulation. However, if there is a really hard market crash, it might still be that the auction does not bring the enough DAI to the system, so that the DAI in circulation is actually no longer backed by at least $1 of collateral in the system. Now then there is a safety mechanism which is the MPR minting. And MPR minting, that's basically like a central bank that makes, that actually creates like, or lowers the interest rate to make sure that more money comes into circulation. With Maker, that's actually a little bit easier. So we mint new MKR tokens and we sell them on the market if we see that the system is actually under-collateralized. And that's also a difference between multi and single collateral DAI, because multi-collateral DAI is the first time that the system is actually being used, that part of the system is actually being used as it was conceived. So I've been talking about DAI, I've been talking about MKR. MKR has different functions, and in both systems actually, MKR also makes sure that you have a voting right to set the essential parameters of the system. And yeah, this is not a difference, this is the same in both. Alright, so as I said, since this is a technical audience tonight, I was hoping to dive a little bit deeper into the way that the system was designed, the rationale behind it, and this is the first thing to consider. So the multi-collateral DAI system is, as opposed to the single collateral DAI system, is designed to be token agnostic. So this is the way that we approach these different collateral types, because this poses a technical problem. If you want to integrate these different types of collateral in the system, then typically you would have to make certain assumptions about the tokens that you're using as collateral. Now, you're probably familiar with the ERC20 token standard. The system can be built quite easily in a way that we only support ERC20 tokens, but actually we designed the system in a way that works with data contracts, which means that we do not only support ERC20 tokens, but also any other kind of token that you that has certain core characteristics that we need. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the core system. So the way that we've created the system is one that is really focused on security. Some of you may know that Maker has invested a lot of time in formal verification of the smart contracts that we use. So formal verification is basically a mechanism that is taken from typically the hardware industry that's used to, for example, prove that software systems for planes, for example, is really error-free. We are applying the same techniques to make sure that our smart contracts are actually bug-free. So that's another design concern that we have here actually taken up from the very start, and that we tackled by making sure that the core system is as simple as possible and does not contain any external calls. Because as soon as you have an external call, you can no longer mathematically prove that the system actually works as it's supposed to work. So that's another design decision that we took very seriously from the start. And then the last design decision that I listed is the fact that multi-collateral DAI is modular and upgradable. This is actually quite different from single collateral DAI. Upgradability is really a problem that happens to a lot of smart contract projects, and it's quite a well-known problem in the space by now, I think. We designed multi-collateral DAI in a way that you can actually replace modules in the system so that you don't have to redeploy the entire system when you need to change something, or when you need, for example, to fix a bug. This is quite important because if you cannot do that, like smart contracts typically are like hardware. When you put hardware out, when you put it in the market, it's there, it's done. You cannot, well, you can take it back, but it's incredibly expensive, and really no one wants to do that. So that's another way that we tackle it. We make it modular so that when something goes wrong, we can actually replace a small part of the system rather than having to redeploy the entire system itself. Alright, I talked about this already. So I actually pulled these slides from an internal, more technical manual that we have. So I won't go into every detail that is in there. But this shows how we are actually abstracting away the different types of collateral. So we have a collateral module for every type of collateral that we want to support. And the module basically defines or it contains the logic for 3 basic operations in the system. How do you add collateral to the system? That's the join. How do you move collateral within the system? That's the move. And then when we do liquidation, we need to sell the collateral. And that's the what we call the flipper auction. So that's another piece of business logic that's really isolated and that you can add for every collateral type that you add in the system. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the magic behind the stability mechanism. How do we actually make sure that the DAI stable token actually remains stable? So there are 4 mechanisms here that we need to look into. And these are like 4 lines of defense. So depending on the pressure on the market, the pressure on the price, we'll go down this list and trigger each one of these mechanisms. But yeah, so we'll start with the first one, supply and demand, which is quite simple. If things get worse, and I've already talked about this one, we'll start liquidating CPPs. If that also fails, I also mentioned this when I talked about MPR token, we'll do MPR token dilution. So then we are using MPR as the lender of last resort. And then the final line of defense is a mechanism that we call emergency shutdown. So emergency shutdown is like, unlike the name maybe suggests, that it's a graceful wind down of the system. So what this means is that the system is frozen basically, and all the collateral that is in the system can be redeemed. So that means that everyone who holds a DAI token at that moment when the system is frozen, they can use a special function to reclaim collateral worth of $1 for every DAI token that they hold. Now, because the system is over-collateralized, then actually there still is collateral left in the system. And then there's a second redeeming function, which is for the CDP holders. So any collateral that is left, they can then also redeem from the system. Yeah, so I went through this quite quickly because I wanted to get to the technical tricks that we use, or some of them, in the system. And I have selected one for supply and demand, one for liquidation, and one for the MPR dilution. So if we start with supply and demand, first I should maybe dig into how supply and demand stabilizes the DAI token. So imagine that there is a shortage in the market and the price of the token, the DAI token, is actually rising above $1. Now, what will happen then is that CDP holders are actually incentivized to take out bigger loans to generate more DAI and put that DAI on the market so that the price on the market is actually pushed back again. The opposite mechanism also holds. So suppose that the price in the market is lower than $1, then that's a very good time to repay your loan that you took out. So if you can buy DAI at 98 cents, for example, then a loan that you took of $100, you can actually pay it back with only $98. So that's another mechanism here. Now, that in itself is not enough actually. What we need here is a mechanism that, as I mentioned, was very similar to the interest rate that the central bank set. And this is for us the stability rate. And I want to dig a little deeper into how the stability rate is set. So what is the problem with compounding fees? So the stability rate, or the stability fee, it's very similar to the classical interest rate that you're used to. But think about how the system is built. You have a smart contract system running on a blockchain where every computation costs money. And you have the stability fee that needs to be applied to every CDP in the system. And of course this is a problem because first of all, the blockchain is inert, so it means that you need an external trigger to start logic. You cannot have like a timer running in the background and increasing the stability fee all the time or calculating the stability fee. So what you actually need is a system that works when you temporarily or periodically call it yourself. You might do it every minute externally, so you call it from an external source. You might do it every day, you might do it every hour. So that's the first problem. The next problem is that we cannot actually loop through all the CDPs to increase the debt that was taken out of these CDPs, because that would be way too expensive of an operation to execute every time. So how do we do this? The trick that we're using is that we have something that is called the rate accumulation function and the drip call. Now, if you have a look at the graph there, suppose you have a stability fee that might be, for example, 1%, 2% a year. If you remember from your mathematics classes, what you will get is, if you calculate that, your debt will increase following the blue line, the ideal rate. So this is an exponential curve. Now, once again, this is something that you cannot do on a blockchain because it's continuous, it's applied to all the CDPs at once, and this is calculation that you cannot do. So what we have instead is a rate parameter that is actually updated from time to time. And this can be, as I said, sometimes after a minute, sometimes after a day, sometimes after a week. And then when that happens, that is the drip call. When you call that function, then it will actually update the rate to the actual value that you, what it should be at that time. And this is the orange rate that you see. So if the rate that is applied to all CDPs at once, and we'll see how we do that in a moment, if the rate is increased from time to time, but not on a regular interval, what do you think would happen if you open a CDP and you draw a line, and before the next update, you actually pay back your loan that you took? The system behaves as you would expect from the orange line that you see. So if you do that, then you would actually pay no interest on your loan. And that's why the people who are incentivized by people paying their stability fees, they are by consequence incentivized to call the drip function to make sure that this rate value in the system is updated from time to time, enough so that every CDP holder actually pays their stability fees in the system. So this is a quite unusual way of tackling this, but it's actually a result of blockchain technology and the way that we need to implement it. So you might wonder then, what happens if the stability fee changes? Well, because we have this drip function that is being called from time to time, this actually doesn't matter. If at one point in time the stability fee is changed, so let's say if you have a debt and you see in the graph that, let's say someone starts with a debt of 20 DAI and they leave it there for 24 months. And you see that on the right, on the left, you have a fee of 50% per year. Of course, this is for illustrative purposes. The real fee is much lower. Let's say that the fee then changes after 12 months. Now, if you think back to this curve, that is actually a problem that is solved really naturally in the system. Because the rate is recalculated from time to time, the new stability fee is simply applied when the rate is changed. So if you didn't have the mechanism, it would be very hard to actually keep track of the exact curve that you need to apply. The next question that you might ask is what happens when people take out a new loan or pay back their loans? Now, once again, we're working with blockchain technology. Every calculation costs money, so you want to keep as little data as possible. And capture as much information with it as you can. So that means that if you're a very active CDP holder, and let's say you start with 20 DAI, and then you generate another 10 DAI after some time, after you've accumulated interest, and then you pay back 10, you draw back 5 again, and so on. All these operations, although they are in the blockchain, the present state of the system cannot keep track of that because it's too much information. It would be way too expensive to store. So what does the system instead? If we have a look at the situation where the CDP holder, after 12 months, so they started in the beginning with 20 DAI, and after 12 months, they have accumulated 10 DAI stability fee that they need to pay extra. And then actually they take out an extra loan of 10 DAI. So there it jumps from 30 to 40. We cannot keep all this information, so what the system does is, at that point, will actually reflect your debt back to time 0, and it will add a smaller amount than you actually took out. So let's say that you take out 10 DAI, and since the beginning of the system, the stability fee amounted up to 200%. You take out 10 DAI today, well actually that reflects, if you reflected back, that would have meant the same as 5 DAI at the beginning, because then you would have paid up to 10 DAI in stability fees. And that's what the system does. It calculates what the value of the debt would be had you taken the loan in the beginning of the system. And that's actually the only parameter that the system keeps track of for performance and cost reasons. All right. So that was one. I see that I have 5 minutes left, so we'll take questions. So I have 3, I think. After this one, I might go over time. So we'll see if there are not too many questions, and maybe I can show you the mechanism as well. But the second mechanism is one that comes with liquidation. And this is the quite well-known problem in blockchain space of price oracles. So first of all, how does the liquidation work again? So on the right, you see the same diagram that we've shown in the beginning. So you have collateral of 200 worth of ETH and $200 worth of ETH, and you've taken out a loan of 185 DAI. Now, when the system, when the value of the collateral drops below a certain value, as we mentioned in multicollateral DAI, then you will be liquidated by auctioning off your collateral. So what does it actually mean? Well, put your collateral on the market for the debt amount that you need to cover. So you took out, let's say, a loan of $185. We hold an auction that needs to generate 185 in value. And then the DAI is destroyed, so your debt is cancelled, and whatever leftover collateral there is, that will be sent back to you. The one thing that we're assuming here is that the system knows the value of your collateral in dollar terms all the time. And that's why you need a price or a price fee. And while this might look or sound pretty simple, once again, blockchain technology is quite restrictive. And we need to make sure that everything is cryptographically secure. So who's going to say what the price is of your collateral? Might be, for example, if you, let's say that you can lie to the system. Let's say that you can tell the system that right now the price of ETH is $10. Then everyone's CDPs would be liquidated because the system would think that there is a huge market crash. So this is a very important failure mode of the system that we need to take into account. So how do we make sure that these price oracles aren't lying? So, yeah, before we get into this, the basic principle of this is the same solution really as blockchain would typically apply, which is cryptographically signing transactions. So you have a number of semi-trusted sources that are selected by MPR voters, for example. And they will each submit their price, but they sign it with their private key. So you can use your private key not only for just sending the Ethereum transaction or calling a method on a smart contract. You can also send it to submit a price, or use it to submit a price. And that's exactly what happens. And this is what happened for single collateral DAI. So we have multiple parties submitting their price, and then the system takes the median of that price, and that will be the price that's actually used to calculate the value of your collateral. So in that way, we spread the risk of having lying price oracles. Now there is a problem with that approach. Because the price needs to be updated continuously, and think back to the rate function, calculating your stability fee. It's the same thing. So you can do it, you can call from time to time that function, and you can update the price from time to time, but it's actually quite expensive to do so. So what improvements have we built for multi-collateral DAI? Let's have a look. Our improvement for multi-collateral DAI uses technology that is called the scuttlebutt client network. This is a way to, instead of having everyone send their price transactions, their price data directly to the blockchain, make them pay for it, we collect the different values up front. We use the scuttlebutt network to collect these values, and then we, in one transaction, we send all the values to the blockchain, rather than having to submit one transaction for every value. So if you have, let's say, in this example it's just 3, but in reality it's much higher. If you have, for example, 12 prices that you submit to the blockchain, you can now do this transaction, probably not 1/12th of the price, but let's say at least 1/6. Now the way that this works is that this is an off-chain network that uses cryptographic signing to make sure that that you have the same guarantees. And this is quite difficult if you think about it, because these people, of course, they all have different private keys. So that's how we leverage the scuttlebutt technology to actually work in these circumstances and still be certain that when we submit these different values to the blockchain from these different parties with different keys, that we can still ensure that everything is cryptographically secure, and in that way actually bring down the costs immensely. This diagram also shows another improvement on our price oracle mechanism. So you have the what's called here the ETH OSM, which stands for Oracle Security Module. And this is actually just a delay that is built into the system of 1 hour, which is another emergency mechanism. Because if you see, or if the system detects that there is a problem with the price, there is a window of 1 hour that you can actually trigger emergency shutdown. The last line of defense that I talked about to stabilize the system. And then it is sent to a spot contract, and finally then the system knows what your collateral is actually worth in dollar terms. Alright, so we're half an hour in.
It's actually okay if you finish the presentation. We have a bit of slides.
Really okay. So then the last one is the debt and surplus options, and this has everything to do with the next mechanism, the stability mechanism of MPR dilution. So first a little bit about MPR itself. So what is this MPR token that we're talking about all the time? The MPR token really has 3 functions, and they they're listed here. So it's a utility token, it's a governance token, and it's a recapitalization resource. Now maybe it's best to have a look at the governance token aspect first because it's the easiest to understand. So as I mentioned, an MPR token is also a vote. And when we are discussing this system, we are discussing a lot of parameters that we need in order to make it function correctly. For example, if you think about who decides what this minimum collateralization level is, if you think about who decides which types of collateral will add to multicollateral DAI, if you think about parameters like the length of an auction, different things, these all determine, and of course the stability fee most importantly of all, these values really need to be set correctly in order to make a system that actually works in practice. And that is the kind of decisions that you get to decide over if you hold MKR and you exercise your right to vote. So that's the first function. The other two functions have to do with MKR dilution. So it functions as a utility token from a perspective of the stability fee, the person that is paying stability fees. So in single collateral DAI, it's the case that you actually need MKR to pay back your stability fees. Why is that? Because if you have MKR governors who make sure that all the parameters in the system are really well balanced and the system works well, there are not many liquidations, and the third line of defense, MKR dilution, if that one is never triggered, then you have a very successful system, and there should be an incentive for MKR governors to behave in that way. So if you pay your stability fees with MKR, what happens is the system takes that MKR and burns it. So it brings down the circulating supply of MKR. And as you know, when the token becomes more scarce, it becomes more valuable. And this is the incentive that we bring to MKR token holders. And then the last third function, the recapitalization resource. So this one I talked about already, so this is quite simple. If you have the opposite situation, if you have a system that is badly governed, then disaster will happen. So for example, if the minimum collateralization level is set too low, then it might be that your collateral is sold off, but it doesn't actually, what they get for it, or what the system gets for it, doesn't cover the debt that you have had taken out from the CDP. So that means that MPR will be minted, it will be created and then sold in an auction. And of course, then MPR becomes less scarce and therefore cheaper on the market. All right, so the question here is, what exactly happens when the price of multi-collateral price feeds suddenly drop, or more importantly, when there's like a really hard market crash? So the MKR holders, what they will do is they will kick a debt auction. So what happens is that the MKR holders, auction keepers, users who are incentivized to do so, they will actually kick a debt auction in multi-collateral DAI. And this is slightly different. So if you remember what I said about single collateral DAI, with single collateral DAI you pay your stability fee in MKR, the MKR is burned, and then the MKR token increases in value. In multi-collateral DAI, more convenient to the user, you actually pay your stability fee in DAI. But how then does that translate ultimately in a decreased MKR token supply? So this is once again an improved version of what we had in single collateral DAI. So we do this using these debt auctions. So when the system accumulates a lot of surplus, coming from these users paying back their stability fees in DAI. So you took out a loan of $100, you waited some time, you paid back 120 to cover the principal and the accumulated stability fee. Now the system has 20 DAI of surplus. What we do is we let the DAI surplus accumulate over some time until we hit a certain threshold. And then we use that surplus DAI to buy MKR on the market. So it's basically the same end result, it's just via another route. So instead of having user-paid MKR, which is a really hurdle, we actually wait, we let them pay in DAI, the DAI accumulates in the system, we get a surplus, and then we buy back MKR from the market. And this is what is depicted here. I won't go into the details because that would really be too much, but yeah, there will be more information available soon online that you can look into. Yeah, I actually switched the two. So the system that I was explaining is this one. If we go back, this is the opposite situation. So when you have a number of liquidations and they don't bring enough value to the system, then the debt option will actually kicks off. And this is the same principle. So we talked about the system building up surplus from receiving stability fees. This is the opposite situation where the system builds up bad debt. So your CDP is liquidated, but the system doesn't receive enough DAI to cover the debt. So if that happens a number of times, then once again a certain threshold is reached, and then the opposite, so the debt auction will be kicked. So it's the complete opposite. It's basically the symmetrical version of the MPR auction. Instead of buying MPR from the markets and then burning the MPR, we do the exact opposite. So if we need, for example, 100,000 DAI to cover debts that were not covered by liquidations, then we'll put 100,000 DAI on the market and we'll put an auction on the market that says we want 100,000 DAI. How many MPR do you want for it? And then the first bidder comes in and says, I want 100 MPR for 100,000 DAI. And the next bidder comes in and says, I'm okay with only 95 MPR. And so on. So the system then, after some time, it closes down the auction. After hopefully the MPR value or the MPR amount that is being asked has dropped quite a bit. Then it mints the MPR, it sends it to the bid winner, and then with the DAI that was received, the DAI will be burned, and in that way the debt of the system is settled again. And once again, this is a much more performant and optimal solution than the one that we have in single collateral DAI. All right, and I think that's all I have. Indeed. So, thank you.
So, wow, I feel that I understood the system quite well, that there's a lot more complexity behind the scenes. There must be questions. No questions? Questions?
My question is not about what you present, but it's very important to ask. What's your vision on the debt ceiling, which is very close right now?
Yeah, can you explain what the debt ceiling is?
Yeah, so we talked about certain risk parameters in the system, for example, minimum collateralization ratio. Another risk parameter is the debt ceiling. And the concept is the same in single collateral DAIs and multi-collateral DAI. So for every collateral type, you have a maximum number of debts that can be taken out against that collateral. So, for example, currently for ETH, single collateral DAI, we have $100 million debt ceiling, which means that at that point, no one can take out debt any longer because, it is deemed at that point too risky, and you need an MPR vote to actually raise that debt ceiling. So what my view doesn't matter because we work with a risk team, and it is of course their job to follow one of the principles that we've established with Maker, which is the principle of using data and science-driven risk calculation. So the team, of course, they're very well aware that the debt ceiling is being reached or could be reached soon. They're weighing it against the risk of the fact that we still have single collateral DAI, that because we only have one collateral type, that raising the debt ceiling too high might actually destabilize the system. And you have to weigh that against what happens when the debt ceiling is hit, which is that market dynamics starts to put pressure on the peg, but it won't necessarily break it right away. And what I can say is that we'll do what is necessary or what makes the most sense from that balance point of view. So when the risk team says that it's time to raise the debt ceiling, we'll put that in MPR vote and make that happen.
Could it be changed without a coin vote?
No, we do need to vote to raise the MPR debt ceiling. To raise the debt ceiling.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. This is my first interaction with Maker, so thank you for the presentation. I thought it was very, very good. I have a few questions actually, but I'll just stick to, I think, the most important one. How do you ensure liquidity in the Maker token? In the Maker token.
In the MPR token. So for this, I think it's best to look at really the big picture, which is the evolution towards decentralization. So what we did in the beginning is with the Oasis DEX, which was one of the first decentralized exchanges that we put on the blockchain. That really was the reason that we needed that market to create that MPR liquidity. Now, it's not really the role of Maker to, or at least we would hope that it doesn't remain our role, to be the single player in the market to provide that marketplace for this liquidity. And as the ecosystem is growing, there are more and more places where you can trade MPR tokens. So that's why Maker actually prefers to step away from that role. Also because of course, the regulatory hurdles that might occur at some point in the future, and that might bring about a certain cost. And so we try to combine these two things, make sure that by decentralizing, Maker no longer has to step into that role and basically be this centralized point of failure that could go wrong, and then suddenly the entire MPR liquidity could be gone. At this point, we thought that it was a good time to actually push out the responsibility of MPR liquidity in the wider community. And at this point, it does seem to be the case that more and more alternatives are available to the one that we initially brought.
Because if the market's not liquid and you burning tokens, that doesn't necessarily reflect in a higher,
You're absolutely right. So there's another way to look at this. So it's not only MPR, right? It's also the platform, for example. if you hold a collateral option, then you actually need a liquid motive for that collateral. Now, for traditional collateral like Ethereum, that's actually not a big problem. But when we start adding more collateral to multicollateral DAI, that's one of the aspects that we'll need to be really careful about, that there is enough liquidity, and if there isn't, that we build other mechanisms to make sure that the price that we get is actually a fair one. An interesting case to think about are NFTs. So non-fungible tokens, typically very unique, with a very illiquid market.
Yeah.
And we are looking into multiple ways to tackle that problem.
Because that would, because in that case, you have presentation something about, at least that's how I interpret it, I might be wrong, but adding multi-collateral would increase stability. But in fact, most likely people will liquidate the position when prices crash, in which case correlations would pick up. And so there's no use of using multi-collateral because correlations run to 1.
You asked about the debt ceiling, right? So one of the reasons that we have a debt ceiling is to make sure that the liquidity of the collateral is actually reasonable for the amount of debt that is taken out. And I'm definitely not a risk analyst, so this is not my strongest point. But yeah, so once again, this is the task of the risk team to assess this correlation and make sure that the system is not too risky.
Thank you.
So that financial degree of yours comes in handy after all.
Yeah.
So there was a question of that.
The system relies on voting, and I was wondering what is the percentage of MKR tokens in respect to voting? And is it really optimized? So do you think the voting results always an optimized solution?
So we should start by saying this is an incredibly hard problem, and of course we're not the only ones struggling with it. The way that we approach it, so there are two things. One is the actual voting mechanism and the number of votes that you need and what you're actually voting for. So the MPR voting system currently, the way that it works is that you, when there is a proposed change to the system, that change is implemented, it's written in a smart contract, and the smart contract is put on the blockchain and it's plugged in the voting system. And once a certain threshold of votes is reached, then that mechanism will trigger and will apply its logic to the system. For example, increase the density. Right? The calculation of the threshold of votes that you need currently is, it works with a principle that we call, you have the what we call the hat proposal. And the hat proposal is, so this is like a pointer that points to the last change that has been triggered. And let's say that you have 100,000 MPR that voted in the last change to the system. If you want to apply an additional change, so there's a new proposal, then you need to have more than the number of votes on the old proposal. And you can, of course, imagine different situations. So it could be that, let's say, an extreme situation where the 100,000 MPR of the old proposal doesn't move, it just stays on the old proposal. Then you would need just 100 MPR plus 1 extra to trigger the new proposal. However, if the group of voters is exactly the same, then every vote that you would have would move 1 MPR from, by the way, I'm saying 1 MPR, but it's, you can vote in fractions as well. But you would move like 1 vote from the old proposal to the new proposal, meaning that by the time you have 51, then the old would be at 49, and you would also have triggered it. And it looks at like the momentum, like how many people are involved in the community, and depending on how many were involved in the last vote, that's an indication of how many we need to be involved in the next vote in order to take on a new proposal. Another thing to look at is the actual distribution of MPR in the market and how many MPR holders there are. And then, of course, the more MPR dilution we have, the more new MPR holders that are in the market, the more we'll need to think about like activating voters, for example. And that's the way that we look at it is that this is a gradual process, and by starting now, when it's still quite centralized, relatively centralized, when the system grows more and more decentralized, this gives us a gradient to see what happens and act accordingly. And of course, any aspect of the system can be changed through voting, including the voting system. So if the community sees, for example, at one point that there's this deadlock situation, or there's this risk of deadlock situation, then the voting mechanism could be tweaked so that we can take that new situation into account.
There's probably many more questions, I know, but I need to keep up time. And so we'll have a quarter of an hour break now, and then behind the break we'll have 2 shorter presentations, so together that'll be about 1 hour again, and then you'll understand everything about what this ETHDEVNL thing is in the world. But give a big hand to Wouter, and then